Welcome to Buffalo Pregame, your source for live Buffalo hockey discussion, news, analysis, opinions, and more. Presented by ASM Publications.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Buffalo Pregame. I'm your host, Alex Brasky, here for ASM Publications. On today's show, we will take a look back at the Sabres offseason with Brian Koziol of WGR 550. You can follow him at Brian WGR. Plenty to discuss as Sabres fans have been left a bit dissatisfied with the moves Buffalo has made over the past several weeks. And each week on Buffalo Pregame, I'll provide updates on the NFL, NHL, and more via daily articles, podcasts, videos, and much, much more. Please subscribe to Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, along with Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky on Substack, both of which are free of charge. All right, let's get into it. We'll evaluate the Sabres offseason on today's episode and really ask the question, should we be satisfied? And I think everyone is kind of in lockstep on the answer to this. I think everyone's been left wholly dissatisfied as the Sabres have progressed through their offseason, beginning with the JJ Peterka trade that they were really forced into as Peterka wanted out. He had had enough. He either didn't like what was going on in Buffalo, didn't like his role, or a combination of the two, forces his way out of Buffalo. And that makes it tough on the Sabres, but it's also an indictment on the front office and the head coach and Lindy Ruff, how you can't talk a player that is so valuable to your organization, a top six forward, that once you let him go, you're looking for another one right away. You can't talk him off the ledge. You can't reel him in, and you can't get him kind of set with the program. You're able to do that with Bo Byram, maybe not at the same level as JJ Peterka, maybe not as coveted on the trade market. So maybe a little bit different of a situation there. But at the same time, I think it's an indictment on the front office and the organization as a whole when you have people walking out the door. And hey, if they don't get things turned around soon, you could see Captain Rasmus Dahlin doing similar to what JJ Peterka did this offseason. But you deal a top six forward talent for two ho-hum players, Michael Kesselring and Josh Doan. Doan, a guy who has spent time in the AHL the past two seasons. And both of these players are from the 11th place team in the Western Conference last year. So it's not like you're bringing over two of the top players on a playoff team and they're battle tested. They're going to come in here and give your roster what it needs in terms of that playoff experience and that gritty nature to get. No, they're going to have to prove it just like everybody else. And that's really what the Sabres enter this offseason with. It's such a prove it phase. There's so much that has to go right for them that you wonder that if it actually will, and if they'll be able to make up the 10 or so points, I believe 10 to 12 points that they missed the playoffs by a season ago. And if you look at this Peterka trade, does Michael Kesselring and Josh Doan, do they really inspire that type of confidence? There's hope that Doan at 23 years old and Kesselring, I believe 25 years old, there's hope that these players will develop, but these aren't guys that have a lot of experience playing with top lines, playing big minutes, and experience in clutch situations. So they're going to have to transform their game from somewhere it was this past season and in seasons past to somewhere that really they've never been before at the NHL level. So it's going to be interesting whether Doan, a lot of people have expressed confidence with him in terms of his ability to progress to that next level, but he appears to be a third line player at best to me. So I'm not sure how much he's going to move the needle. And then Kesselring, it's the same thing, a decent piece. He'll fit in there with Owen Power. Hopefully that's what the team is hoping for, but he's an upgrade on the right side. How big of an upgrade? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that he's going to help you make up half or whatever the amount of points that you missed the playoffs by. So I'm not so high on this move. And it comes down to Kevin Adams and kind of what has been the case with him the past several years. You are left sitting on your hands in the offseason, waiting for the big move. And in this case, you knew this one was coming with Peterka forcing his way out, and the return just leaves you so uninspired. And then the Bo Byram saga, in my opinion, a disaster from start to finish. You allow things, and we'll talk about this in depth later with Brian, who was very gracious to spend about 20 minutes with us. I only asked him for 10 or 15, but Brian gave some good stuff, and we kept him for 20. So grateful for him. He's dealing with the golf going on right now, the Porter Cup in Buffalo, the Open over there in Northern Ireland. So Brian, a very busy guy. You'll probably hear him on all the WGR shows this week, and he was gracious enough to spend a couple minutes with us as well. But when you're the Sabres, you allow things to extend out as far as they did with Bo Byram, and that just handcuffs you in terms of the money you allotted for him and the offer sheet that never came. And you kind of had fans geared up for a trade. A top six forward is coming back in return, and you were never able to make it happen. And the trade door is not completely closed. It's a long offseason. Maybe Bo Byram is dealt by the time the Sabres hit the ice in September and October, but it just doesn't seem likely at this point. And to not find that top six forward, where are the goals going to come from this year? You've become tougher to play against, and I understand Byram is kind of an offensive-based defenseman, if that's the correct term, but I'm just not so sure where the goals are going to come from. And there's a lot of talk about the Sabres needing great goaltending to win this coming season. I had Bulldog from WGR on in the past, and he really hit that point home that the Sabres are going to need an exceptional goaltending season in order to end this 14-year playoff drought. But with their new phrase, harder to play against, where are these goals going to come from within that top six? They need a massive jump from two or three guys. You have Zach Benson, Josh Norris, if he can stay healthy, maybe, but can you really count on that? And then all these guys that you need to take a leap forward beyond that, Power, Samuelson, Doan, who I touched on initially, and then Kulik, who's likely to be on that first line. So, and then you talk about the goaltending situation. UPL, Devin Levi, it reminds me of the Bills' defensive line entering this season to make a comparison. You're looking for TJ Sanders to come in and take this group to another level. You're looking for Joey Bosa to stay healthy. You're looking for Michael Hoyt to come off his suspension and be a contributing player. And I'm just not so sure that you'll be able to count on that. It just seems very unlikely. And not only is it one position group like it is with the Bills, it's the entire roster for the Sabres, up and down the roster at every position, forward, wing, center, defense, goal. You need guys to take a step forward, and it just doesn't seem like this group really has what it takes to elevate the Sabres. I mean, it's been 14 years, and you look at the end of this past season and how they're going to enter the next season on paper right now, it just doesn't seem like they got much better. So it seems like they're running in circles the last 2 years, no better off than they were to begin the offseason, if they are very, very incrementally so. So I'm just not so sure about the plan this offseason. And even what they did at goaltender is frustrating, because it seemed like entering this offseason, and I wrote about this previously, that it seemed like it was a no-brainer. Let UPL try to rebound from last season, bring the young guy, Devin Levi, who seems to have conquered the AHL with the Amherst, bring him up and kind of see what you have there. You, at the very least, at the end of this season, you have to know what you have with those two in goal. You can't go into another offseason needing this top six forward, needing additions on defense, and also needing that goaltender. Or if you do, you need to be sure that you need that goaltender. You can't go into another lame duck offseason with these goaltenders and let them kind of drag their feet around without any sort of NHL improvement, as Levi has been hit or miss, and UPL has been very inconsistent even at the NHL level. So all in all, just a frustrating few months and a dark time for Sabres fans. I'm just not sure I've ever seen this group as in the dumps as they have been over the past few weeks. I know that there's still a faction of the Sabres fan base that believes in everything that they do, and you go into the season with a bucket full of hope, but just not so sure that hope is not going to run out by the time they find the ice this season. But I digress. Let's bring in our guest, Brian Koziol of WGR 550, who's able to join us for a quick spot as we ask the question, should we be satisfied with how the offseason played out? Brian joins me now. Here with Brian Koziol of WGR 550. Very grateful for his time and joining me today on the show to talk a little bit of Sabres. It's a busy golf time. So, Brian, like I said, you're very gracious for spending a few moments with us.
For sure. Yeah, we love it this week. I was up at Niagara Falls Country Club today for the first round of the Porter Cup and then the Open Championship, the last major of the year that I'll be following closely. So I'm sure you have your alarm set, Alex, for 1:30 a.m. to watch the first tee time, right?
No, I'm more of like a 6:45 a.m. guy. Maybe rise at that time, maybe backtrack a little bit.
Yeah. No, it's good. I like morning sports, like just to have it on, turn it on. So Wimbledon's good for that. The Open's good for that. I don't want it every week, but that's why I do like these events a little different. We get to wake up whenever you do wake up and it's on.
Right, especially in the summer when the other sports are kind of in their downtime. It's the All-Star break and so on and so forth. So it's good to get a little bit of mix in there. And like you said, some morning sports never hurt anybody. Some golf over coffee and donuts. It's going to be an enjoyable time. But let's get down to business. Sabres. Bowen Byram re-signs for 2 years with the Sabres and ends this long offseason saga. A lot of people wanted him traded, maybe himself included. He's still a young player. Do we like the value here that the Sabres got with him? I believe it's $675 AAV.
Yeah, I think overall they did a nice job with the contract. Now, I have some issues with how it led up to that point and how Kevin Adams got it that far. And then there was the statement publicly about, hey, if another team matches or puts out an offer sheet, we're going to match it. Like, I don't love disclosing kind of your strategies out there, but I mean, was that Hiv's way of saying, don't do it? I don't know. I don't love that fact. And I also feel like how he explained about not spending all the cap money that was available to him before the Byram contract was there. I mean, there's between 13 and 14 million available dollars. And, I think it's a fair question to say, like, hey, are you going to spend up to the cap? Like, is there an internal cap? Of course, he always denies that there is. Sure. But he kept saying, like, well, we have to see how this Byram situation plays out and whether we have to be prepared for the offer sheet and all. So it's kind of like he was handcuffed, at least in my opinion, during the start of free agency, because he's like, well, I have to allot this money in case someone offer sheets Byram and we need to match it. And I was like, well, if this 2-year deal at a reasonable price of $6 and change per year was something that you guys both felt like was in the best interest of both players, and I think there's an argument to be made that it's the benefit of the Sabres and it's the benefit of Byram. Why wasn't it done before free agency started so that they could go ahead and have a better, I want to say a little bit more of an aggressive plan and at least a little bit more clear plan of exactly how much cap space Kevin Adams had to deal with. And then maybe he could have been a little bit more aggressive in free agency. I know that, we're still looking for maybe that top 6 forward. And if it meant to have to overspend somewhere to do it, I mean, I think the Sabres in their position with no movement clauses and players not wanting to sign here, like you may have had to overpay somebody to do it. And I think it would have been understandably so, like maybe a move that he just had to do, but because he was kind of in limbo mode of how this Byram situation was going to play out. Meanwhile, you had 3-4 days of NHL free agency after July 1st, where all these teams are making these signings and the Sabres were kind of, for the most part, standing pat. There was a couple of depth signings and a couple of Rochester signings and things like that. But for the most part, there wasn't any big impact on the Sabres top 6, which I feel like is an area that they haven't addressed now for years.
And you're right, with the way that the trade market played out, it appeared pretty quickly that there wasn't going to be much market out there for Bowen Byram. It seemed like it dried up pretty quickly in terms of that potential top 6 forward. So I think once you reach that point, pull the trigger if you expect this to be the case down the road anyhow. You're right, allowing it to get to arbitration and the hoops that they went through, it just seemed so unneeded, and playing your cards so early in free agency seems a little uncommon for a general manager to do. I know that Kevin Adams isn't the most run-of-the-mill prototypical GM. We've seen him do some interesting things, say some interesting things over the years, but I just found this whole Byram situation to have been dragged along far too long. And it's good to get a player of his caliber back in tow. We all know how good he is with Rasmus Dahlin, but at the same time, at this point, where are the goals going to come from? But sticking with Byram, I mentioned still a young player, 24 years old. Is this a player that they're looking to develop over these next 2 years considerably, or is he kind of what he is at this time? I know that a young player seems like he's still got a long way to go in terms of progression, but sometimes some guys hit that roadblock. And is he a guy who can improve upon his 7-goal, 31 assist season from a year ago and maybe develop some of those defensive skills away from Rasmus Dahlin if given the opportunity? Is this someone who can develop in the future for the Sabres in really the near future?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you mentioned right your last two words there, near future, or something that Kevin Adams really needs to have happen, because he's not the contract itself would dictate that, as well as maybe Adams and how long he'll actually be here as the GM, as long as this team continues to not win. He maybe is not concerned about how Bo Byram's going to play at age 28 or 29 at this point. Byram with Dahlin last year looked like an all-star at times. In fact, there were nights on post-game where I'm like, wow, the best defenseman on this team tonight was Bo Byram. And, I wasn't at all slighting Rasmus Dahlin. It's just the way Byram had been playing was very, very impressive, confidently jumping up in the play, even just making smart defensive positions in terms of how he would break up plays. He's obviously not a huge guy. He's not going to overpower a ton of players around the net or things like that, but he seemed to anticipate the play pretty well and be in the right spot, which is something that a lot of Sabres defensemen have struggled with over the years, is having that awareness of like, where's the puck going to be in 2 seconds from now? And can I be in the right spot to help obviously transition the other way to the offensive side? I think the numbers itself would automatically go up if he got power play time. Now, the Sabres power play was pretty brutal for most of last season, but if you're on the power play, you're going to accumulate some extra points here and there. And I'm to pay a defenseman who's more offensive minded than defensive minded over $6 million and not have him be on either power play is interesting. I mean, right now, Dahlin is the defenseman on power play 1, Power on power play 2. Neither of those were very effective. There's no way Dahlin comes off power play 1. No. I'd like to see a spot where maybe Byram can maybe be a guy on power play 2. Power, you're paying, of course, $8 million a year. You gave him a really, really long-term contract. You spent the number 1 overall draft pick on him a few years ago. So there's probably some thought there of like, well, how could we not play him on the power play? So Byram, I think one piece that we've heard at times about him maybe not being totally 100% committed of wanting to be here long-term was like, hey, why can't I get a chance on the power play? Not only will it help me statistically, but kind of build confidence and things like that. So can your power play 2 have 2 defensemen? I guess it could. For the Sabres, who struggle to score, and they also just removed another one in JJ Peterka, you probably need as many forwards out there as you possibly can that has an ability to put the puck in the net. So for Byram, ultimately, can he play at a very high level when he's not with Dahlin? That's something that, I guess I would value, because there's always injuries during the course of the season that shuffle pairs. Now, if ultimately, if you said, knock on wood, there's no injuries and he's just going to play with Dahlin every night and he's going to be great, well, okay, you need somebody to play with Dahlin. It's not like Dahlin's going to play by himself, so you got to have somebody there. And if Byram is the guy that seems to be confidently playing well with Dahlin and it works and it makes the team better, then I guess in the end, that's all you're looking for.
Yeah, you mentioned that power play opportunity, and that really seems to be the sticking point with him and kind of got the ball rolling with maybe him wanting out of Buffalo, as you mentioned. And with that logjam there, and with him having, from what I gather, one of the more well-known agents in the NHL, I'm sure he's looking for that payday coming down the road. And we all know goals equal money. And in order to get that increase in goals, I think he's going to have to see some time on the power play. But you mentioned the contract situation with Owen Power. So like I said, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place with Byram. And you mentioned his pairing with Dahlin, as I did earlier, and that kind of links into my next question. Another critical piece for them, getting harder to play against, yes, but they need the saves on the back end in order to have an increased success rate that they had last season. UPL a couple of years ago had a fine year, but last year far too inconsistent. They didn't get the veteran backup that they needed in James Reimer. They're trying to switch gears with Alex Lyon coming in, and still a chance that Devin Levi advances to the NHL level. But you mentioned Dahlin and Byram playing together. They were plus 20, I think, in goal differential and somewhere around 950 in their goalie save percentage when on the ice together. So that grouping can kind of help catapult your goalie situation into a more favorable situation. But it's still critical, like I said, to get those saves on the back end. Where do you see this goaltending situation, and how concerned are you entering the year? And three-pronged question, where do you see Levi playing in?
Well, I thought before the Alex Lyon signing that they were going to let Levi and UPL battle to see who ultimately would take the job. And, you know, a huge part of the Sam Reinhart trade to Florida was picking up Levi and hoping that maybe he at some point, because of statistically being labeled maybe the greatest college goalie ever and his time in college. And then he put together an outstanding season in the AHL with the Amherst and put up statistical numbers that people were saying, hey, they were the best with Rochester since Ryan Miller. So, you know, that's obviously a great name to be compared with already. So I thought, okay, Levi really, really at times carried Rochester last year. He had an incredible season. He was good early in the playoffs. I'm sure he wasn't happy with how the final series with Laval went, but the whole team really struggled, and that was a quick series. So I don't want to just say it was Devin Levi's fault, but for the most part, I feel like you'd say, did he, for playing basically an entire season in Rochester, did he get out of it, and did you get out of it what you wanted? And I would say yes and yes. So is he ready to finally now make that step and go to the NHL? I thought yes. Now, the signing of Alex Lyon would say that maybe the Sabres feel like that the best spot for Levi is again going to be in Rochester. Ultimately, no matter where he ends up, and I've said this many times, he has to play. You can't just have him come up and play like 18 games and say, well, that's going to continue his development. Like, so if that's going to be the case, well, then maybe if they were that gung-ho on UPL and then, well, they go out and sign Lyon. Now it's like, well, you've got three, and Luukkonen obviously is not going to go to Rochester. So, like, how does this play out? And I don't think Alex Lyon signed here thinking that he would be a Rochester goalie. So statistically, Lyon also has had some good numbers, not in the bulk of games that Luukkonen has had, but Luukkonen was very inconsistent last year. They need big saves, and they didn't get it last year. Luukkonen gave them big saves for the second half of 2 seasons ago, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. He really didn't this year for the most part, and they definitely are going to need good goaltending. I mean, we're watching a trend now where for a while there we thought maybe like how important is the goalie position, and you look at now what Florida has gotten from Bobrovsky over the last 2 seasons in these series where on paper, Florida's team very good, very deep. But you go up against Toronto, you go against Carolina, and you're thinking, well, talent-wise, these other teams are very good. So why is Florida better? Their goaltending is better, and maybe in the playoffs they play a grindier style of hockey that wins battles more, and that's ultimately maybe why Florida has been able to separate themselves from the Torontos and the Carolinas and the Tampas of the Eastern Conference and get better. So I credit Florida for doing it. Look at the last set of Cup winners. It's been Florida. It's been Tampa. Vasilevsky was excellent. So maybe having a high-priced goaltender is the trend that this is happening. Now, with that said, the Sabres have Luukkonen $5 million, Lyon a low-price deal, Levi still on his rookie deal. So they're not tying up a ton of money there. But you got 3 guys, and ultimately, if you said, is there an argument to be made that any of those 3 rise up and take the number 1 spot? I feel like if you gave me enough time, I could argue all 3 showing a path that they could be the number 1 goalie. But they need somebody. And ultimately, in the end, I guess it doesn't matter who steps up. They need one of them to step up and take reins. Luukkonen seemingly, for the most part, plays better when he plays more often. But when he only has 1 day's rest, I know we did a statistical breakdown. He's not as good. So maybe Lyon will get his opportunity. But ultimately, in the end, they can't screw around and they can't waste time. The Sabres, the schedule came out today. They've got a ton of home games. We've got a ton of games with an opportunity early on here where there's very little travel.
Six of the first 7 at home.
Yeah. So I mean, here's your chance to do what you haven't been able to do for the most part of these 14 seasons, and that is get off to a good start. They always put themselves in a hole. So you're at home, and honestly, if Luukkonen comes out of the first 2 games and doesn't play well, I know 2 games of 82 seems like a drastic way to say it, but like, no, I'd pull the plug and be like, look, doesn't mean you can't play. It just means we're going to give Lyon the next 2 or 3 games and see what he can do. And if he can't do it, then I might say, okay, Levi, you're coming up. I'm curious to see how training camp plays out. The signing of Lyon, though, would indicate that maybe Kevin Adams still has Levi's sights on Rochester, which for me, in some sense, just the intrigue of it. Like, I want to see what Levi can do now at the NHL level. I feel like he's had enough time in the AHL. So the curiosity piece of what Levi can bring is there with me. But in the end, I think your point is valid. If they don't get saves from one of these 3 guys in the end, it may not matter if they're, quote, harder to play against or if their defense is better. And they're going to need saves because they definitely have lost offensive scoring. Peterka's potential of scoring 30 goals is gone and hasn't been replaced.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's kind of setting up, as you said, kind of trial by fire, a fierce competition in net, at least early in the season, to see who has the ability to go on that hot streak that they need to get off to that good start. And something else they need to avoid is that cold streak midway through the season, as we saw last year, really kill their chances. And I think that's been the aim with their change in philosophy over the last 2 years, becoming harder to play against. They're trying to avoid that extended skid. And when you have more veterans, when you have, like you mentioned with Florida, those grinded out type players that they're tried to acquire, and a Michael Kesselring, a Connor Timmins, and the players that they brought in this offseason, I think that they're trying to avoid that in that sense, in providing more consistency in their tenacity from a game-to-game basis and making it difficult on their opponents. So I think it's really going to come down to, like we mentioned, the goaltending, but then how those pieces fit together. So I guess my final question is, what is your view on how all this has come together this offseason? The 2 highlights or lowlights, however you want to view them, is the Byram saga and the Peterka trade, like you mentioned, in the return that they got for Peterka and then a few free agent signings. So what's your view on kind of how things played out and how they're moving forward with this new harder to play against mantra?
I think ultimately the players that they got back in the Peterka trade are fine, and it may do exactly what he wants them to do, and that is to be harder to play against. Lindy Ruff's goal and Kevin Adams' goal, but you still have to score goals to win, and they didn't replace that. To just hope that Jack Quinn, coming off of, again, 2 serious injuries and a disappointing season last year, is he just all of a sudden going to get his scoring touch back to the point where he can just score 25? Peterka, I think, at 28 and 27 these last 2 years. Can he just all of a sudden score that number? I don't know. If he does, I guess that's going to help tremendously, but there was no other real addition to the offense. And to go back to our power play discussion, they have to get better production there. They're going to be a good team. Being on the power play is an advantage. It's supposed to help you in games. It's not supposed to lead to shorthanded chances the other way. It's not supposed to deflate you on the bench when you can't even get the puck into the zone and your home fans are booing you. That's not the point of a power play, and that happened very often last year. So, yes, I mean, to put the blanket statement on here, this is going to sound super cliche, but it's like, yeah, you need the offense and the special teams and the defense to play harder against, and you need the goaltending. Like, yeah, I just rattled off everything that a coach would say here, but the Sabres don't have a lot of like ability to have just, one line carry them. They don't have McDavid Draisaitl's line that can just go out there and like win you games. Tage Thompson at times can maybe take over a game, but they don't have that just dominant offensive force, or they don't have that lethal power play that the league fears that can also score 2 or 3 goals a game to help you carry on. So they need more of a complete attack, and I think that's where Kevin Adams is going. I am surprised that he wasn't more aggressive, either via trade or via free agency, because what GM of any pro major 4 sports teams would get a 6th season after missing the playoffs 5 times and finishing dead last in 2 of those 5? Like, it doesn't make sense, but here he is. Whether he feels fortunate or whether he feels confident that he's got a job for a long time, I wouldn't be. I'm surprised he wasn't more aggressive. I know officially the season doesn't start till October, so I guess something else could happen. I wouldn't predict it. But that urgency for them to start off good, man, Kevin Adams has got to be feeling that, I would think, because track records would say, unless Terry Pagula's got the patience of an angel here, is that his track record of being a GM here, if they get off to another poor start, I doubt you're going to fire Lindy Ruff. I think that's the next major move if all of a sudden they get off to another bad start this year.
And you mentioned all the areas that the Sabres need to get better. That's kind of the state of the team right now. A lot of teams go into the offseason looking to improve incrementally in one phase of the game or another. The Sabres kind of need it all to come together, and that's a frustrating spot to be in when you've missed the playoffs for 14 straight years. It seems like you've been building toward nothing, and a lot of fans had high expectations for this offseason, and just to be let down with, in my opinion, a mediocre return in that Peterka trade, and then to not get anything for Bo Byram, and to kind of just, like you mentioned earlier, stand pat and go with the status quo going from one year to the next. I think it's just led to a very disappointing offseason and about as low of fan morale as I can ever remember. And I guess that makes sense with the 14-year playoff drought. But with that being said, Brian, we thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell the people about your coverage on Tee to Green and also anything coming up Sabres-wise and what you got going with the Porter Cup and the Open?
Sure. Thanks. So we're going to be doing a 2-hour show on Saturday morning for Tee to Green up at the Porter Cup up at Niagara Falls Country Club. We'll be talking about the Porter Cup. We also will be talking about the Open Championship. So pro golf over in Ireland, and of course the great amateur tournament at Niagara Falls. We'll have that for 2 hours. You can follow us on social media at T2G Buffalo, T2G Buffalo, and then of course myself too at Brian WGR on our social media handles. So looking forward to that. And then I know that Paul Hamilton and I were just talking that we kind of lined things up. We're going to be broadcasting those prospects games in September. I know the Sabres have one on Friday night and Saturday night and then Monday afternoon. So we'll be doing those games on WGR as well. So I'm sure we'll be back and doing our coverage. And as far as I know, everything's going to be as normal for our post-game show coverage with myself and Paul and Pat Malacaro. So we'll be excited to be back on. And as I say to everybody when they say how do you do it? And I say, look, I'm so motivated to want to talk about the games with fans after games are over and about the strategy of the games. And let's talk about that power play in the third period that was so impactful. Let's talk about that big save or that lack of the big save. Because it feels like for 14 seasons, all I ever talk about with fans on the postgame show is, do we have the right coach? Do we have the right GM? Is the owner committed? And I'm not, and I'm done with this team kind of conversation, and it's wearing on me. So I want to talk about the games. So let's hope that happens.
Yeah, the situation is so bleak. The big picture is so dark that you kind of got to put that aside and try to worry about the micro rather than the macro in those situations. So, Brian, thanks for your time and have fun this weekend and enjoy the rest of the summer.
Thanks, Alex. Great.
All right. Big thanks to Brian Koziol for joining me on the show. Great stuff from him. And you can follow him at Brian WGR and on the Sabres pre and post game throughout the season. Don't bring up the drought. Just focus on the game for Brian's sake. Please, God, just focus on the game. But before we take off, I want to leave you with this. I know that Brian said that he doubts that the Sabres will fire Lindy Ruff no matter what happens this year. But in my opinion, if the Sabres don't end the drought this year, they have to completely hit reset. As much as I hate to say it, Lindy Ruff has to go along with Kevin Adams. They're placing all their chips, the short stack, indeed, into the center of the table with this getting harder to play against. And if it doesn't work for them, like I said, they got to hit the reset button. You got to bring in a new voice, a new philosophy, somebody to come in here and flip that switch that the Sabres fans have been looking for the past 14 years. And I just think heads need to roll, multiple heads need to roll if the Sabres aren't able to end that long playoff drought. And simply for saving face with your current players, I mentioned before, if they don't get this thing figured out soon, Rasmus Dahlin could be out the door. And then once he's out the door, Lord knows who follows him. So thank you to Brian for joining me. And we'll see if Kevin Adams can stop wandering around in the dark looking for that light switch and actually find it this season with this team that, to me, just doesn't seem to be that much improved. But thank you for joining me. We will see you next time on the next episode of Buffalo Pregame.